Hi there, I'm Daniel Seberg with Google in New York City, and I am joined right now by Amanda Terkel, who is a senior politics reporter at the Huffington Post. Amanda, thanks for hanging out with us.
Great, thanks for inviting me.
So I want to talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing, primarily covering the Newt Gingrich campaign. What can you tell me about some of the comments that his tact has gone rather negative? There were a lot of comments that his money was spent on sort of a negative campaign in Florida. How do you think that affected what happened there?
Well, Florida was a really negative campaign. I think something like 92% of the ads in the week running up to the primary election were negative. And every election people say, oh, this seems like the most negative in history. But I talked to people and they said, no, actually 92% of the ads being negative, that actually is perhaps the most negative in history. And I mean, Mitt Romney and his affiliated PAC are really fueling most of this just because they had more money. But Newt Gingrich, in the beginning, he said, I don't want to go negative. I want to keep this a clean race. But after he was burned a bit in Iowa by Mitt Romney's negative attacks, Newt Gingrich has gone all out and is just as negative.
And is he, obviously we now have to turn the page to Nevada, which is taking place on Saturday, perhaps already looking ahead to Super Tuesday. What is the strategy for Newt Gingrich's campaign, given that he has now fallen so far behind in the delegate total against Mitt Romney?
Well, his campaign is, and he himself has been saying repeatedly that basically they are going to try to shore up the conservative base. Rick Santorum is still in the race. He's lost a lot of momentum since Iowa and really isn't registering much anymore. So Newt Gingrich is trying to take voters away from Rick Santorum, become the Tea Party candidate, the conservative alternative to Mitt Romney. So all the Republicans and conservatives out there who are uneasy with Mitt Romney getting the nomination, and there are certainly a lot of them, Newt Gingrich is trying to bring them all to his side and hoping it's enough people to vote to sort of overwhelm those people who are supporting Mitt Romney.
And you mentioned those conservatives. What about Newt Gingrich trying to focus perhaps more on social issues? You write about how he talked about religion, contraception, trying to make those a focus of his campaign. Is that going to play against perhaps Mitt Romney talking more about the economy and that sort of thing?
Well, Gingrich is also talking about the economy, and Mitt Romney, I mean, Newt Gingrich is definitely playing up some of these social issues. I did a story last week. I got a robocall of Newt Gingrich saying that Mitt Romney tried to basically vetoed a bill and took kosher food away from Holocaust survivors in Massachusetts. I mean, it was one of those really fear-mongering, scary robocalls, exactly what people think robocalls are all about. And not only was he saying that Barack Obama is waging a war on religion, he was trying to imply that about Mitt Romney too, perhaps playing into some uneasiness with Mitt Romney's Mormon religion amongst some of the Republican Party. Didn't do that explicitly, but it was a very sort of unusual robocall. So Newt Gingrich, though, is also focusing on economic issues. He hit Mitt Romney for saying that he's not concerned with the poor in this country because there's a social safety net for them, and Gingrich has certainly been going after him on that and on his work at Bain Capital.
And you talk a little bit about looking beyond Florida. What is this going to? How is this going to shape out? Is Super Tuesday going to become the coronation in a sense for Mitt Romney? Do the other candidates, Ron Paul and Rick Santorum, really stand any chance at this point? Do they align with somebody before Super Tuesday? How do you see the dynamic between now and early March?
Newt Gingrich really has an uphill battle. I mean, Mitt Romney has a lot more money, he has a lot more organization, and Newt Gingrich is going to need really some sort of miracle to turn voters against Mitt Romney and get enough delegates that it matters. I mean, Ron Paul, though, is an interesting case. I think he'll stick in it for a while. I mean, Ron Paul really doesn't have a chance of winning, and he never has a chance of winning when he runs, but he keeps running because he is getting his message out there. He is appealing to a certain part of the Republican base, the conservative base, the libertarian part of the party. So he is going to keep going out there, and really they're focusing on delegate counts. They are looking in some ways the Barack Obama strategy, they might not be the states that are getting the most attention, but they have delegates. And if you get enough delegates little by little, he may not get enough to win, but he can get enough to matter at the convention. And Newt Gingrich has said that he's taking his campaign all the way to the convention. He is not giving up early. He is going to be a thorn in the side of the Republican Party, even if he doesn't get the nomination. So expect this to be a very long GOP primary.
And does that affect the morale or the cohesiveness of the Republican Party if it does go all the way to the convention, that they can't seem to unify around one candidate before they can actually get there?
Well, I've heard both things. I talked to a lot of Republican voters in Florida, both Romney and Gingrich supporters, who were pretty upset by the negative campaign. They said this sort of thing is not good for the party. I wish they would talk about issues more. These are just attacks that are going to be used by Democrats. At the same time, a lot of them had no problem with a drawn-out primary, saying it can get our candidates vetted more, we can make sure we get all the attacks out of the way before Obama comes. So I think voters might like to see a drawn-out primary, but they might want it to not be so negative. I don't know if you really can have both of those things. But GOP voters, I think their numbers were down in how many turned out to vote in Florida. So that is not a good sign for the Republican Party heading into the general election.
How do you see Super Tuesday shaping up? Can you target particular states and maybe walk through where you see Newt Gingrich having particular strength, or Mitt Romney, or even Rick Santorum and Ron Paul?
Rick Santorum right now Rick Santorum is tough. I mean, I would predict if someone drops out first, it will be Rick Santorum, and who he throws his weight behind, we'll see. He certainly, I think, his supporters have more in common with Newt Gingrich. I think many of his supporters would like him to see throw his weight there. But I know that Newt Gingrich's supporters, when I was talking to them, they want him to stick around because they're hoping that he can pick up some of those southern states. And they're hoping, being from Georgia, being that he did very well in South Carolina and sort of speaks the language of the South, where there tends to be a more conservative electorate, they're hoping that maybe he'll pick up some of those states as they come up.
But any states you can target in particular on that Super Tuesday day when we've got 10 states in play? Any that you see that align closer to Newt Gingrich or to Mitt Romney, or is Mitt Romney pretty much ahead in all of them?
I think Mitt Romney is very much ahead, unless there's some surprise that comes out of Nevada or Maine this weekend. I think Mitt Romney right now has the advantage. Again, he just has the organization. He has been planning this for quite a while, and he has the money.
Does it behoove Mitt Romney, because he's so far ahead at this point, to start targeting President Obama and almost start talking about the general election rather than focusing so much on the other candidates who are still tugging at his heels?
That's what he tried to do at first. He tried to basically pretend he was the only Republican running, and being on his press calls, getting all the press releases, they were all targeting President Obama. But when he started to have more competition from Newt Gingrich and even from Rick Santorum, that's when his campaign decided to turn their attention, saying, look, we're not actually going to be coronated. We're not actually going to win the first 3 primaries like we thought we were going to. So they have turned their attention, but certainly he tries to keep the focus on President Obama to make himself seem like the eventual GOP nominee. I mean, he wants to seem like the inevitable nominee. That helps him. People say, we might as well get behind him now because he will be the one to run, and he's the only one that can go up against Obama. He's the only one that's taken seriously. And that's the image his campaign has been trying to portray for a while.
Let's step back for just a second and talk about the issues. When you left Think Progress to go to the Huffington Post, that was during the 2010 midterm elections. How have you seen the issues in the national spotlight change since that time? It's only been a couple of years, but can you touch on certain things that are maybe more in play now than they were just a couple of years ago?
Well, I think what's actually depressing is how little has changed since the 2010 elections, how little Congress has done, how so many of the issues we're talking about are the exact same issues we were talking about in the 2010 elections. And because the parties in Washington can't get their act together and cooperate, pretty much nothing's been done on these fronts. And that I think is what's really frustrating a lot of Americans, and why we could see some very interesting congressional elections this year. I mean, most Americans of both parties I talk to, they're just frustrated with Congress. Congress is incredibly unpopular, as unpopular as President Obama may be, it's nothing compared to Congress. And especially Republicans in Congress, although Democrats aren't doing that well either. So right now, a lot of the issues are the same. Housing, the economy, people looking for jobs, economic issues are still at the top of people's concerns. I'd say the one issue that's slightly lower down is Afghanistan and the war, because those are coming to, Iraq is ended and Afghanistan is coming to an end. So those will be, I think, less of issues. But again, the economy dominated in 2010. I think it will again.
Where will you be for Super Tuesday, by the way?
I'm not sure. I'm planning all this out on a very day-to-day basis.
But you hope to position yourself in maybe one of those states to sort of get a pulse of what's going on?
Hopefully. We'll see how exciting the race is, but we have a few reporters who have been out on the trail. I was in New Hampshire and Florida. I think I'm going to skip Nevada, spend a little bit time in D.C., getting my head back into the bigger picture of what's going on. But I'll be going to the conventions. We'll be probably going out to more of the states, and we'll definitely, there's nothing like being on the ground to get a feel for what's going on.
Just for folks who are interested in politics, maybe don't understand why candidates like Newt Gingrich or Rick Santorum or Ron Paul would stay in the race even though they may not have any chance of winning the nomination. Why do they stay in it going all the way through to the convention? What do they hope to get out of something?
I think there are some cynical answers and there are some sort of more idealistic answers. I mean, I think for a lot of them it's getting their message out. They might not be able to win, but in Ron Paul's case, for example, he has brought a lot more attention to problems with the Federal Reserve, and the Fed is now a very common phrase in politics, and that's because Ron Paul has popularized it, bringing attention to the war and showing that some conservatives are opposed to, intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, that's something Ron Paul has done. So for Ron Paul, I think he's more of a movement candidate. He's a message candidate. He's just trying to get the word out there and make these more popular. I think a lot of candidates honestly stick it with it because they think they can win. Everything says they can't, but it takes a certain type of person to run for president. You really have to be pretty confident, and so I think you will stick with it until it absolutely shows that you can. And there are candidates, quite honestly, who also do this for publicity. After you run for president, you can do a lot of things. You can make a lot of money writing books, giving speeches, going on TV. So it's lucrative for them to stay in. Although at some point, if you stay in too long, you might wear out your welcome.
And I guess to perhaps be included in a future cabinet,
exactly,
or elevated to a higher position within the government.
Exactly, which is why there's some danger if you are too negative and make an enemy too much of the eventual nominee. They might not invite you in.
At what point in all of this does Mitt Romney start to focus, assuming that he will be the eventual nominee, which seems to be the prevailing opinion, but let's just operate under that assumption for the moment. At what point does he start to discuss his vice presidential companion in all of this?
I mean, I have no doubt that he's thinking very closely about that now, and some of the governors, for example, who have endorsed him already probably thought, I'm going to throw my hat into the ring. It seems like he's going to be the nominee, and hopefully he'll remember me and that I backed him very early when he's going ahead and picking his vice president. So I think they're definitely, I'm sure, thinking about it. It's important chemistry, who can they get along with, but also politically, what states are important. A state like Virginia with Bob McDonnell, the governor there, who has endorsed Mitt Romney. There's Florida with Senator Marco Rubio, who's very popular. Those are important political states. These are young up-and-comers in the Republican Party that would maybe bring in more votes for people who are uncomfortable with Mitt Romney or whoever becomes the nominee. So those are some of the things they're looking at. I mean, Newt Gingrich, when he was in Florida, he already said a couple times that he thinks Marco Rubio's looking awfully good for vice president. And I don't know what Rubio thinks about that, but Gingrich is already putting it out there.
Amanda, we've just got a couple minutes left. Anything you're looking at beyond this coming weekend and Super Tuesday? Any trends, any sort of scuttlebutt or news that you can share with us?
Well, I think we're still watching, all of the money that's coming in, and not from the candidates, but from these independent, unaffiliated super PACs that technically are independent, but are clearly behind a certain candidate and are usually run by staff or big donors of one of the candidates. And how they are influencing the race has been very, very interesting. You know, they put a lot more money into ads in both South Carolina and Florida, and it's the first presidential election where they've been around to play like this, and it can get very nasty. So it'll be interesting to see where the money goes, when the money shuts off. I mean, if Newt Gingrich, the affiliated super PAC, or the unaffiliated but backing Newt Gingrich super PAC, decides to shut off the funds, that'll be a real blow for him because his campaign doesn't have as much money as Mitt Romney's campaign.
Who would you say has benefited the most, perhaps, from these super PACs?
Tough to tell. They both had a lot, but I mean, I guess in some ways, perhaps Newt Gingrich has, because without it, he would have very little money. But with it, he at least has some voices on the air defending him against Mitt Romney's ads. But without it, I think Mitt Romney, the money going into the Romney campaign would just overwhelm him.
Great. Well, Amanda Terkel, a senior politics reporter at the Huffington Post, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you decide on where you want to be for Super Tuesday.
Great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.